Hello, fellow readers and booktubers. There was a short essay in the New York Times today that I thought was very intriguing, and I'd like to share it with you. The essay was written by Melissa Kirsch. There she is, Melissa Kirsch, New York Times. And the title of the essay was At Capacity, which of course is usually used as a computer term. But what really drew my attention to this essay was the subtitle, which is this: if we can't remember the things we read and watch and even loved, do they still count? If you can't remember a book that you've read, does it even matter that you read that book? And I thought, well, that's an intriguing question and something that's been on my mind lately. A friend of mine, not long ago, who is a voracious reader like myself, told me about a curious experience he had had. He had purchased a book from the local bookstore. He got home and began reading the book, and then he realized he had already read the book. In fact, he had already purchased the book months and months earlier, perhaps a couple of years earlier. And he had asked me if I had ever experienced anything like that, and I said, no, not yet. Although, not too long ago, I was rearranging the books in my bookcase where I keep all my fiction books. And I pulled out one novel there. I recognized the cover. I recognized the title. I knew this book was fairly new. It was on the New York Times bestsellers list just a few years ago. I remember reading it, but I could not remember a single thing about the story. I couldn't remember the names of the characters. I read the brief summary of the book on the dust jacket. It didn't help me at all. So I was wondering, good Lord, what's happening to my memory and what's happening to the memories of many of my friends. I'm guessing from Ms. Kirsch's essay, she makes some references about herself, and perhaps we're about that same age when the memory starts to get a little dull. I liked very much when she talks about, in the beginning of the essay, she notes that her memory used to be razor sharp. She could remember everything, but lately that sharpness is going away. And a friend of hers had commented that she might be entering the quote butter knife era of her memory. I like that. That made me laugh. In fact, the essay is fairly comical, but she's making some really good points. And she was wondering, the human brain is very much like a computer, or computers are very much like the human brain, and there is, have we reached capacity in our memory hard drive? Are we running out of disk space? Is that possible? And Ms. Kirsch suggests that it could be, and the reason for that would be that we're just experiencing such an influx of information. There's so much material out there that's bombarding us daily. Turn on your laptop, turn on your phone, and just start flipping through, doom scroll. And there is just so much stuff out there. And of course, Facebook and Instagram and all these other things, if you even try to follow the news, you're going to lose the narrative within the first 10 minutes and just feel like you're drowning in information. And Ms. Kirsch says, well, that could account for the fact that maybe our memory is just filling up, and as a result, we're losing stuff. She would then go on to quote a novelist by the name of James Collins, who I'm not familiar with. I did a little bit of research into him. I think he's only written one novel so far, but at any rate, he'd written an essay from 2010, and he talks about the books that he loved, but could no longer remember anything about those books. And he writes, and I'm quoting him, "All I associate with them is an atmosphere and a stray image or two, like memories of trips I took as a child." I like that very much, and I can say that. I may not remember the plot of every book that I've read, or the characters that are in it, or if it's a work of nonfiction, I might not remember the specific point the author was trying to make, but I can usually remember where I was when I read the book. I can remember if I was living in an apartment, which apartment it was, or was I reading this book after I'd bought a house in the suburbs? Was I reading this book when I was still single or after I got married? Was I reading this book before or after my daughters were born? Did I read this book before or after the death of my wife? Was I a history professor at this time? Sometimes I can remember the weather. I remember I was reading this book during the great blizzard of whenever, or I remember reading this book when we were on vacation in Florida, or even off country, outside of the country somewhere. I can usually remember those things, even if I can't remember the specifics of the book itself. And I thought that was kind of unusual. but apparently not. Collins mentions this. Miss Kirsch mentions it, and then she goes on to quote Collins a little further, and he said that the experience of reading, even though we might not remember specifics of the text, he, quote, it leaves a kind of mental radiation that continues to affect me even if I can't detect it. So it's in there. It's locked away in your brain cells somewhere. Probably the entire text of every book, article, magazine article, even every movie you've ever seen, it's all in there. And if somehow we could hardwire our heads and connect them to our laptop, we could download a massive library of books if you've been a reader all your life. Perhaps that day is coming, but it's not here quite yet. But, and is that possible? Is that a real thing? In this article, too, Marianne Wolf, a neuroscientist, also addressed this same phenomenon of not being able to remember things that you've read. And Marianne Wolf would write, we can't retrieve the specifics, but to adapt the phrase of William James's, there is a wraith of memory. I like that, the wraith of memory. The information you get from a book is stored in networks. We have an extraordinary capacity for storage, and much more is there than you realize. It is in some ways working on you even though you aren't thinking about it. And I think that's the key here. You may not remember everything that you've read, but what you read has impacted you. It's still with you in some way. It may be indefinable, it may be the ghost of a memory, it may be the ghost in the machine, but it's in there somewhere, and it does affect you. And that reminded me of a very famous quote that I like from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a voracious reader himself. About the mid-19th century, he would write, I cannot remember the books I've read any more than the meals I've eaten. Even so, they have made me. I'll let that sit with you for a while. Next time you can't remember a particular book that you've read. And I would say, I think maybe Miss Kirsch would agree with me that the answer to the question as to whether it matters that you can remember that you read a book or not, does it still count? I think Miss Kirsch would agree with me that absolutely it counts and it does make a difference. So keep reading, and that's what I've got for you today. Bye-bye.